Have you ever wondered how education can truly empower underserved regions, all while building trust through decentralized credentials? Well, this episode is your gateway into a world where innovation reshapes how and where people learn. Join us as we dig into the incredible work behind Open Campus and its ambitious mission to disrupt a $5 trillion industry. If you're curious about how blockchain can revolutionize education or how young leaders in Southeast Asia are driving change, this is the conversation you cannot afford to miss. Stay tuned. So today I'm thrilled to welcome Will Fan, co-founder and CEO of NewCampus, a forward-thinking business school transforming leadership education in emerging markets. Will is also a key partner at Open Campus, a groundbreaking Web3 platform backed by powerhouses like Binance and Animoca Brands. Open Campus focuses on decentralizing education, leveraging blockchain technology to create more accessible and verifiable learning pathways. And with over a decade of experience spanning China, Southeast Asia, and beyond, Will's work bridges education, technology, and entrepreneurship to empower learners globally. So, get ready for an insightful deep dive into how he's bringing the future of education on chain. Will, thank you so much for being on the show. Great to see you again.
It's been a long time, Drew. So excited to be here, and so thankful for the work that we're doing together.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm excited to talk about that work particularly and this whole idea of disrupting education using technology and specifically Web3. And I think most of the listeners know me from working with ByteBow from, teaching lawyers about technology. So it would be really cool to kind of introduce them to Open Campus and how we work together and how all of that is come about. But I guess we can start with a little bit about NewCampus because you are actually one of the founders of NewCampus. And can you tell us a little bit about NewCampus and how you started it?
Wow. So this year we're going to our 10th year, and I see so many founders, builders talk about how long it takes to create quote unquote success, and I do think as we go into our 10th year, I feel like there's so much more that we need to do. So New Campus, we're an online business school that focuses on management and leadership training. We serve over 500 of the most exciting frontier venture-backed tech companies in the region. But more importantly, we impact over 130,000 young managers across Southeast Asia, Indonesia, Vietnam, Thailand, Philippines. And a big part of our work is really supporting that inflection point of young companies that are growing from 100 to 500 to 1,000 employees and supporting that next generation of technology uplift. So I mentioned, it's our 10-year journey in building in the education space, but I still think as founders, we're still learning about, what growth is, what success impact looks like. And I think that's kind of led me to where we are today, talk about Web3 and hopefully how some of that technology and ecosystem supports the growth of others.
Yeah, and I think it's so fitting that, now your work with Open Campus is really focused on Web3 because as someone who is somewhat of a seasoned professional, as they would say, rather than using any sort of age-related qualifier, one of the things that I noticed when I came into Web3 was that there's a lot of really good ideas, a lot of activity going on, but not so much of that strategic sustainable, focused approach. And it sounds like you're bringing that, methodology from New Campus into Open Campus. So let's talk about Open Campus and this disruption of education.
So Open Campus, it's only a bit over 2 years old now. And so we were brought in as partners early days when they had launched their token EDU, the EDU token. And that was off the back of a few strategic partners, Binance, Animoca, TinyTap, Gems Education. And what was quite unique about this ecosystem that they were setting up is, like you said, Jamelia, the Web3 landscape is still so young, so nascent. And so it was a combination of serendipity, timing, luck that we were brought in. One of the leads behind Open Campus, Jonah Lau, he was actually one of our earliest instructors in 2014 at NewCampus. And so, one big part of my philosophy is really invest in long-term relationships. And I think that relationship just compounded into where we are now. I think fast forward to 2024, now soon 2025, we've obviously expanded Open Campus to a few different areas. Our core focus is still bringing the 5 trillion education sector on chain. But we're doing this through a few different fronts. One is supporting Web2 companies. So we have an accelerator that's now brought in over 60 of the most impactful, meaningful founders, such as yourselves, in LATAM, in Africa, in the Middle East, and Southeast Asia, 20 million learners collectively. So how do you actually support that pool of innovators and creators? And then you have the Web3 side. So a few unique products. One is the EDU chain, so launching our own blockchain to support user flow, process flow, optimizing some of the tech and infrastructure in place. And then we also have a few other key initiatives like our AI venture arm, like our NFT support system, like our DAO upskilling product line. So I do think as an education player, it's so key to support different parts of the education system in Web2, Web3. And we at NewCampus, we're playing a pretty small part, but enjoying the ride.
It's an important part, though. You're very, very humble in that. I think one of the pieces I'd like to kind of pause on is this idea of why this is needed now. As someone who's seen the education system all the way from, daycare, and, now I have a child that's in college, and then myself who, as a professional, going through the ranks of professional development, continuing legal education, and understanding that just because you land a job or just because you're an executive doesn't mean that your education stops. And then kind of like, there are barriers to that for certain groups for sure. There are barriers for women. There are barriers for underrepresented folks. Can you talk a little bit about the why we need some sort of disruption in this space?
So my personal story entering the education space was an accident, as I think a lot of edtech founders are. You don't pick your track to build in this space unless you're crazy or you're super passionate about education. For me, that wasn't the case. But I think growing up, what did impact a lot of the work that I do now is my parents were refugees and immigrants into Australia. My dad was a cab driver for almost 3 decades. My mother fled the Vietnam War. And so they did everything that they could to send their kids, my older sister, my younger brother, myself, to great schooling. And so I personally saw big transition and big uplift for myself, my peers, my colleagues in having that opportunity to study in law school, to go to tutoring, to get that access and exposure. But then when I kind of entered the workforce, 10, 15 years ago, it was either picking the traditional career paths of, building your career and, having a stable job, or exploring entrepreneurship and, essentially becoming a founder. My first business was actually not in education. It was in career switching. So how do you help career seekers transition from being a consultant, a banker, to a data scientist, a digital marketer? And I think that kind of spiraled and snowballed into where we are at NewCampus. I think we found a very interesting journey of touching government to corporates to individuals to parents to downstream, young students. And if you were to kind of backtrack where my journey is, where it is now, is I've seen a lot of great founders, great teams, great companies build for many years. And so when we had the opportunity to be a partner into this foundation, the first thing that was very critical for my journey and my thesis was, how do we leverage this capital, this expertise, this infrastructure to support other founders all around the world? And I think why this fits very well with Web3 is because it's a collectivist mindset. It's a collective play where we really support each other, whether if you're in Dubai or I'm in Singapore, whether if you're supporting young lawyers transitioning into Web3 or young managers moving up the ranks in Web2. So I think, a big part of my work is looking at the entire ecosystem, but how do you actually, identify pockets of opportunity to actually cross collaborate and support each other?
Do you think there is maybe a different need for education and entrepreneurship today as there was, to when we were kind of growing up? It was kind of like, okay, this is the path that you take. This is what you are supposed to do. And what we're seeing now is that many people are doing what they're supposed to do, but they're not reaping the same rewards or the value. Do you think we're at a different crossroads today?
So there's always going to be cycles for technology innovation. And the reason why education plus minus healthcare have been the slowest industries to innovate is because there's just too much bureaucracy and mature infrastructure in place. That changed a few times. One is obviously during the technology boom, early 2000, and then you had the AI boom that's happening now, and then in between the Zoom, COVID, innovation boom. Then, so I do think there's what we're actually seeing now is a few macro changes that have really forced us to rethink as an individual, as a parent, as a institution, to really think about what does that next version of learning look like. For me at NewCampus, one area was definitely sort of the future of emerging markets. And so,
Mm.
traditionally you would look at innovation in the West, in China, in Europe. But what we're actually seeing is, great founders, great teams build in frontier markets like the Philippines, like Indonesia, like Vietnam, in Jordan, in Lebanon. And so for us as a Web3 foundation is really thinking about how do we use capital influence networks to bring up those economies and bring up those ecosystems. And I think education plays a very big part for that. Does education need to innovate? Absolutely. Will it innovate faster in other markets? That's what we're seeing now. And so as we, hone in on EDU chain, which is building that tech for these new companies, these new learners to come in, but also the portfolio of companies that we're supporting, it's again, how do you provide that layer of support to help everyone move forward together?
I think that's a really important point. It's about helping everyone move forward together. Because a lot of times, what you do see in the space, particularly in tech and emerging tech, is that there's a focus on a very small group moving forward in a way that is just exponential. And so, with this, we're looking at the emerging markets and those groups of people who really have a lot to contribute. They have great ideas, they just don't have the capital and the infrastructure and the connections, quite frankly, to move it forward. And with that, I'd like to talk a little bit about the tech with Open Campus and, kind of let's just introduce the listeners to what it is. I know some people who are in the ByteBow community have already heard about Open Campus. They know about the OCIDs or getting ready to get their OCID. So maybe we'll talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so the verifiable credentials play was something that has always been, very important for us to explore with blockchain. And you've had many contenders enter the market many years ago, trying to take on certifying your, graduation certificate on the blockchain. And I think, there's two angles to this. One is, do you really care about certificates anymore? And then secondly, if you care about it, do we really need to go search, in your mother's basement for that physical piece of paper? And so when we kind of looked at that landscape, it was definitely quite critical to agree that it is a nice to have, not necessarily a painkiller today. Um, but it's also quite important when we look at the portfolio of companies that have 20 million learners. How do you actually support a lot of the process flow, the technology, and infrastructure that they're building? And so to date, we've had over 500,000 signups and counting to the Open Campus ID, which is really the Genesis technology that is starting to map out a learner's journey, but also potentially rewarding them over time. So I think over the course of the next 6, 12, 18 months, there will be new tech that comes into play. But in the beginning, it's really trying to figure out what are the absolute pain points that we want to be solving for. One of which is actually financing education companies like yourself. How do you actually help great teams with the right capital, with the right support, with the right networks to move forward? But then, really start to sound check and understand what are the other areas of build that can help you guys succeed. I think the final part that is also quite interesting now is the rise of AI. We're seeing that rapidly evolve the way that we're building technology, building teams, building businesses. And so we also have a 10 million AI fund that is looking at supporting some of that tech and teams behind that too. So I think as a foundation, our role is to really support this nation building exercise, whether or not teams are building the post office or the railway or the police station. We really welcome those builders and creators to come into play, and we can really obviously provide our resources and team stack to help you guys move forward.
For sure. And this idea of the open campus ID being a verifiable credential is also important when you look at global users, people who are like, so for example, myself moved from US to China to Singapore, bringing in this law degree. And how many thousands of dollars did I have to spend to get it attested? To be recognized by not necessarily it is the visa and the immigration departments, but it's also the employers. And so when you think about the value of having a verifiable credential from the employer standpoint, I know you and I have had some conversations on evidence-based learning and the value with that as well. It really is a huge value for people who want to relocate. They want to prove and to show that they have something and they understand a certain skill set. And now they have the opportunity to bring that with them.
Yeah, I think if you look at the comparables in the market, there's definitely centralized repositories for existing credentials and learner IDs. And one of the biggest ones would be LinkedIn. But if you actually look at the LinkedIn profile, it's self-selective. So if you've completed a course at Harvard 2-day course, anyone can put in their degree and say that they've completed Harvard. And then you can, also go to your online platforms like your Udemy's and your Coursera's, which, are a bit more verified, but still housed and centralized within that organization. I don't disagree that they still have a time and place in the future, but with all these challenger schools, with all of these new ways of learning, I do think there's an opportunity to obviously create that ecosystem to support all of these partners and builders in this space. So the credential piece is very critical for us as a technology, but it's one of many verticals that we're making a big bet on.
Yeah. The credentials are important, but the community is also something that I think is a huge moat or a differentiator with what we're doing at Open Campus. And I know a lot of people who have found me on social media. I'm on TikTok quite a bit, and they joined the Byte Bow community, and they got in there, and they're like, "Wait, we're meeting up every week. This is great!" And they're ready for in-person events, and that is part of the culture. And I saw that represented in Token 2049, where you have the events that Open Campus was doing. Can you talk a little bit about this culture of community and what you're looking to build there?
I love the community piece, and it's always been from uh, my personal growing up playing a lot of games, whether it's your Ragnaroks, your Dota 2s, your Counter Strikes. It's so important to grow and learn and experience things together. That was definitely something that I felt was challenging in Web 2, especially being a venture backed company. You're forced to sometimes grow at all cost. And when 2020 hit and a lot of organizations needed to rethink their strategy, for us it was again doubling down on our early adopters, our early believers, and ultimately the community members that really wanted to champion the NewCampus brand. And so when we forayed into the Web3 space, it was hand in a glove fit, right? And right now we have a few very strong pockets of communities within OC. You have the Accelerator, 60 amazing founders all around the world that we're starting to, have IRL meetups. You have our incubator that was very successful. We hosted over 5,000 developers, 700 projects submitted, and now with the incubator, it's really trying to figure out how do we finance and help these projects succeed. And then you also have some sister brands with Open Campus, ApeCoin University, ApeU. That's something that we're very proud of because it's how we can really play a part in supporting other DAOs move forward. And then obviously, a lot more fun, low key projects like Cappy Friends, which is a capybara NFT that we launched last week. So I do think community is so critical to elevating a brand, but I also think it's the ultimate DNA of being successful in this space.
Absolutely. And particularly when you're global and you're able to see people, you're able to see and kind of feel the vibe that's being created. And really goes back to that point of accessibility. A lot of the people who I've spoken with who join the ByteBow community, one of their things is, particularly in Dubai, I want to learn this, but I need a job. Right. And so people are super focused, hyper focused on if I'm learning something, if I'm learning about introduction to Web3 and blockchain, and I have this credential, that's great. And what is the next step for me in becoming employed or monetizing it in some kind of way? So, can you talk about some of those opportunities? I think people would be very interested to hear.
I think hardship is very important for communities to stick together, whether or not you're, a meme coin and the meme token price just goes up and down. That builds camaraderie, that builds loyalty. When you look at more serious stuff like the education space, that's very critical for us to, identify the community user journey. So take one of our portfolio companies, Ryzen. They have over 300,000 developers in Turkey and India. And so it's really enabling a young 21-year-old Turkish developer to get some exposure, get some real world project experience, and then find a job and, build a career, find that next inflection point of, their journey. And I think, as we think about making bets and investments into different geographies, into different teams, it's amplifying the number of individuals, learners, creators, successful use cases over time. I think, for NewCampus as a business school, we were really the first guinea pig of seeing what could be successful for our learners going through the management journey. But now as we work with partners like yourself, like the other cohort teams, like the Incubate portfolio, it's again, like how are they going to impact more learners over time? And I think that's, again, the power of us playing as a collective. We can't solve every problem in the education space. And I think education needs to be a collective strategy versus individualist.
Lastly, before we close out, Will, I think about your perspective and how you're working with all these different amazing teams from all around the world, but also all with different focuses and different disciplines, sort of like a cross-disciplinary hodgepodge, if you will. What would you say to a lawyer who's listening now who is like, I don't know, Web3 and blockchain, I've been listening to this podcast a bit, but I don't know if I can do it? Um, because a lot of times lawyers think because of occupation, we're just not tech savvy. What would you say to that person?
I believe that Web3 is an amazing technology full of young builders that need help and support. And we kind of looked at the same trajectory with the Web2 tech scene in Southeast Asia 8 years ago, where it was really starting to merge your Grabs, your Gojeks, your Bukla Parks that ultimately became unicorn organizations. I see Web3 as the same thing. So as a player in this space, I see a lot of opportunity to upskill, nurture, develop, build meaningful long-term relationships. And I think as a lawyer or an aspiring lawyer, your role is to actually figure out how to actually support that next generation of movers, shakers, and be part of that journey together. So I do think, at the very least, stay curious. That always opens up doors, and it's also protecting yourself from the change in technology and finance and macro markets. So I do think, at the end of the day, like, why I'm very excited about your space, Jamelia, is you're building that next generation of service legal provider in this space. And for those listening, absolutely, dip your toe. Worst case, you'll learn some things and build some great relationships.
Absolutely. The relationships are usually, not usually, but a lot of times the best part of the learning, because you build these relationships with people who you normally wouldn't come in contact with. And so I just think that it's just so amazing, your work and your role in the space in terms of not just the intersection of education and technology, but this cross-disciplinary area where you get to see a lot of different types of professionals working with the same kinds of technology. So, Will, I guess my last question is, where would you see all of this in 5 years? What is your dream vision for Open Campus and NewCampus?
So for Harvard, it took them 400 years to build a the brand. I'd love to see if we can build Open Campus in five. And I think that it will be more than the current ecosystem of community builders, creators, technologists, innovators. And so if you kind of work backwards from building that brand and the impact of what we need to do, it's financing, it's investing in new technology, it's working with great teams that we can decentralize and allow them to take on the problems that they're trying to take on. I think for New Campus, again, it's a very similar narrative. How do we provide the best impactful work that we do for Southeast Asia? We're already working with 500 of the most impactful brands. What do the next 5,000 look like? And I think what's actually changed in my mindset as a founder like yourself, Jamelia, is if we work together, it allows us to amplify our impact over time. And I think that's what Web3 has allowed me to do as a founder and CEO. And hopefully we'll get there. Worst case, we'll fall a few steps behind, but education is a long-term play, and I'm so excited about being part of that journey.
Yeah, and I'm excited to be working with Open Campus, and I'm sure that we are changing lives as we do this, really focusing in on the impact of the individuals and this, sort of unsure time in people's lives where education and figuring out, how they're going to support themselves is really relevant. So for that, Will, I just want to say thank you, and thank you for joining us on the show today. It's been a pleasure to speak with you.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for tuning in to today's conversation with Will Fan on the future of education through Web3 and blockchain. If you're eager to dive deeper into these topics, learn more about decentralized learning, or connect with like-minded professionals, we invite you to join the ByteBow community. So in this community, you'll gain access to exclusive insights, networking opportunities, and also resources to help you upskill into Web3 and blockchain. So whether you're looking to pivot your career or explore new innovations, it's really the perfect place to grow and stay ahead of the curve. So head on over to bytebow.io and become part of a global network shaping the future of tech in education. And as always, stay safe out there in those crypto streets. Take care.
Yeah.
Hey guys, thank you so much for tuning in and listening to today's episode. I appreciate when you guys tune in and the time that you take to listen to the show and support us. And I have one thing that I'd love for you to do that would really help us out, which is rate the show. If you've enjoyed it, make sure you rate it. You can do it on whatever platform you're listening on. That would do wonders for us. And if you really want to be a super fan and really support the show, there's a link below that you can support us and donate a small monthly contribution, which allows us to continue to create great content for you. Thanks so much again. Appreciate you and see you next time.